Have you ever wondered why God seems silent precisely when you are most tired of fighting? Why, in the moments when you most need an answer, does heaven seem quiet? What if I told you that one of the most mysterious moments in the Bible reveals a hidden truth about God's silence that almost no one notices? In Mark 5, Jesus performs one of the greatest miracles ever recorded. A young girl is dead. Her family is emotionally devastated. The house is filled with fear, sadness, and despair. Then, suddenly, Jesus enters that room, and everything changes. With just a few words, Jairus' daughter comes back to life. This should have become the greatest public miracle in the region. People should be announcing it to everyone. But instead, Jesus does something unexpected, something strange. He asks that no one tell what happened. Why would Jesus ask for secrecy after such an impossible miracle? Why would the Son of God hide something that could make everyone believe instantly? What you are about to discover goes far beyond a simple biblical story, because many people today are experiencing their own season of silence. They pray, they fight, they wait, and yet God seems quiet. Perhaps you too have experienced this. Perhaps you have wondered why God takes so long, why the answers don't come, or why heaven seems distant during the most difficult battles of your life. But what if Jesus' silence in Mark 5 wasn't rejection, but rather part of a much deeper spiritual transformation? Stay with me until the end, because the hidden meaning behind this moment can completely change how you perceive God's silence in your own life. And when you understand what Jesus was truly protecting in that room, this whole story will begin to seem very different. And perhaps that's exactly what makes this passage so powerful even today. Because, deep down, many people know the miracle of Jairus' daughter, but almost no one stops to think about the silence that followed. And sometimes, God's silence hurts more than the battle itself. You pray, you wait, you try to stay strong, but you don't understand why heaven seems so distant just when your soul is tired of fighting. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below about what has touched you the most so far. I really want to know, have you ever gone through a phase where it seemed like God was silent? Often, reading someone's testimony or experience here can help another person who is watching in silence, carrying unseen pain. If this kind of profound biblical message strengthens your faith and helps you see Jesus beyond the words, please also like this video. It seems simple, but it greatly helps YouTube deliver this message to more people who may need exactly this message today. And if you're not already a member of the Jesus Beyond Words channel, subscribe now to continue following this type of reflection on the gestures, silences, and hidden teachings of Jesus that almost no one notices. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content. Because some messages don't appear by chance, and the detail that Jesus revealed in that house, right after the miracle, can completely change how you understand God's silence during your own struggles. There's a detail in this story that makes it all the more human. Jairus wasn't just another man in the crowd. He had position, respect, religious influence. He was a synagogue leader, someone who, in the eyes of the people, should have answers, stability, and emotional control. But when his daughter began to die, none of that mattered. All his reputation, all his authority, and all the appearance of strength vanished in the face of the pain of seeing someone he loved come to an end. And perhaps that's exactly where this passage connects so deeply with our own journey. Because there are battles that shatter any sense of control. There are moments when even the strongest people feel emotionally exhausted. You keep trying to move forward, you keep fighting, you keep believing, but inside something starts to tire you. The mind becomes heavy, the heart loses strength, and God's silence seems to increase the weight of the situation even more. Jairus probably went through this. And what's most striking is that, even surrounded by people, he was living in silent despair. Many people today are like that too. They smile in front of others, continue working, continue posting on social media, continue appearing normal, but inside they are waging an emotional war that no one sees. A silent spiritual battle. A struggle between continuing to believe or giving up hope for an answer. Perhaps the greatest miracle in this story didn't begin when Jesus resurrected the girl. It may have begun the moment Jairus decided to run to Jesus even though he was emotionally devastated. This reveals something powerful about transformation, mindset, and faith during the backstage of our greatest crises. Because sometimes God begins to act even before we see any visible results. And the more you observe this story, the more you realize that there is a hidden truth in Jesus' behavior that completely changes how we understand God's silence during our most difficult decisions. Comment below, this makes sense to me. And then the impossible happens. Jesus enters that room filled with mourning, ignores the noise of the people around him, takes the girl's hand and says a few words. Suddenly, death loses its authority. The girl opens her eyes. She breathes again. She gets up. Imagine the impact of that moment. The shock on the parents' faces. The absolute silence taking over the house. After the fear, after the despair, and after the waiting, the miracle finally happened. And honestly, anyone would imagine that this would be the perfect moment to spread the news throughout the region. After all, who would hide something like that? An impossible miracle. A dead girl coming back to life in front of witnesses. It had the potential to become the biggest event of the time. It was the kind of story that would change reputations, create crowds, and generate an explosion of attention everywhere. But that's exactly where Jesus does something unexpected. Something that completely changes the direction of this narrative. Instead of turning the miracle into a spectacle, Jesus looks at those people and commands that no one tell what happened. Think about that for a moment. Why hide an impossible miracle? Why silence something so powerful? Why would Jesus, after performing one of the greatest demonstrations of authority over death, prevent it from being publicly announced? This decision reveals much more than it seems, because Jesus' behavior was almost never impulsive. There was intention even in his silences. There was purpose behind the scenes. And the more you observe this scene, the more you realize that Jesus was protecting something greater than the popularity of that miracle. The truth is that many people today also seek grand signs, immediate answers, and visible manifestations to validate their faith. But Jesus seemed to teach the exact opposite. He understood that not every transformation needs to become a public demonstration. Some changes happen in silence. Some revelations grow far from the crowd. And some of the deepest battles of our spiritual journey take place in places where no one is looking. The historical context behind Jesus' decision reveals a hidden truth that completely changes how this passage is usually interpreted. Write this down. I'm on this journey too. And this is where many people miss a fundamental detail of this story. Because when we read Mark 5 today, it's easy to see only the emotional side of the miracle. But at that time, the impact of news like that went far beyond spirituality. The people of Israel lived under pressure from Roman rule. There was a collective feeling of revolt, expectation, and anxiety for liberation. Many believed that the Messiah would come as a political leader, someone powerful who would overthrow Rome and restore Israel by force. Now imagine the effect such a miracle could have. A man who raises the dead would quickly be seen as a political threat. Crowds would grow. Tensions would rise. Roman authorities would react. And that is precisely why Jesus carefully controlled how his identity was revealed to the public. This completely changes the mindset of anyone who only superficially reads this passage. Because Jesus wasn't seeking fame. He wasn't trying to build popularity based on shock, spectacle, or momentary emotional impact. In fact, at various points in the Bible, Jesus avoids using miracles as a tool for collective manipulation. He knew that impressed people aren't always transformed people. And perhaps that is one of the deepest hidden truths of this story. Jesus never allowed the spectacle to overshadow the spiritual transformation. Think about the impact of this on today's world. We live in a generation that turns everything into an exhibition. Everything needs to be shown, validated, shared, and publicly approved. But Jesus often worked behind the scenes, in silence, away from the crowd, because some changes happen first within the soul before they appear on the outside. This reveals something very powerful about the spiritual journey itself. God isn't always concerned with proving something to others. Sometimes he's working on something internal, invisible, profound, something related to mindset, decisions, the transformation of the heart. And perhaps that's exactly why so many people confuse silence with absence, when in reality the spiritual backstage may be more active than ever. The hidden meaning of Jesus' silence after this miracle reveals something that can completely change how you interpret the quiet periods in your own life. Comment below. There is purpose in silence. Perhaps one of the most difficult things on the spiritual journey is accepting that God doesn't always work the way we expect, because, deep down, we like visible signs. We like quick answers. We like clear, impactful, undeniable moments. But when we observe Jesus' behavior after resurrecting Jairus' daughter, we perceive something completely different from the logic of the crowd. Instead of turning that miracle into a public event, Jesus protects the silence around him. And this reveals a profound truth that many people have never perceived. Not every miracle is meant for display. Some of God's most important works mature in silence, far from the approval of people, far from the need for public validation, because there are internal processes that need to happen before the transformation appears externally. And perhaps that is exactly what Jesus was teaching in that house. God does not work at the speed of the crowd. While people seek spectacle, God is often working behind the scenes of the human soul, in invisible areas, in broken places that no one sees, changing mindsets, restoring emotions, strengthening decisions, and preparing someone for a journey that hasn't even begun yet. Silence, in this context, ceases to seem like abandonment and becomes part of the transformation process itself. And this deeply touches the reality of many people today, because perhaps you are living through a moment where it seems like nothing is happening. The prayers continue, the struggle continues, the waiting continues, but the answers don't arrive as quickly as you imagined. And little by little, that silent feeling arises that God may be distant. But what if it isn't? What if silence isn't absence, but preparation? Perhaps God is silent in your life not because He has abandoned you, but because there are spiritual battles that don't need to become a spectacle. There are emotional healings that happen away from the crowd. There are revelations that grow in secret before having an impact on the outside. And perhaps one of the greatest hidden truths of the gospel is precisely this: Jesus never confused popularity with true transformation. When we begin to apply this passage to our own lives, we realize that God's silence can carry a much greater purpose than we imagine. Comment below. Something is happening in silence. And perhaps that's exactly what someone needed to hear today. Because there are pains that almost no one notices. There are silent emotional battles happening inside people who continue to smile on the outside. People who continue functioning, working, helping others, trying to maintain their faith, but who inside are tired of fighting, tired of waiting for an answer, tired of praying without understanding what God is doing behind the scenes of their own lives. And when the silence lingers, the mind begins to create dangerous questions. Has God forgotten me? Are my prayers not being heard? Did I do something wrong? But the more we look at Jesus in Mark 5, the more we understand that silence never meant absence. In fact, Jesus understood the human heart in a way that no one else could. He knew exactly when to act. He knew exactly what to reveal. And he knew that some transformations needed to happen away from the noise of the crowd. This completely changes how we view faith. Because faith isn't just about receiving immediate answers. Faith is also about continuing to walk when there are still no clear explanations. It's about continuing to believe even when the situation seems silent. It's about trusting that God continues to work, even when nothing seems to be changing on the outside. And perhaps there's a hidden truth in all of this that few people realize. God's silence is often preparing something that our current mindset couldn't yet sustain. Some decisions need to mature. Some emotions need to be restored. Some wounds need to heal in secret before the next step in the journey can happen. And although this is difficult to accept, there is purpose even in the periods when it seems that heaven has fallen silent. Because the same Jesus who silently entered Jairus' house still enters broken places today, even when no one notices. He continues to reach emotionally weary people. He continues to restore hearts in silence. He continues to work behind the scenes in the lives of those who think they have been forgotten. And sometimes, while the crowd thinks nothing is happening, God is performing the most profound transformations of all. One final detail in this story reveals why Jesus' silence continues to impact so many people to this day. Comment below. God is still working. And perhaps that's the most beautiful part of all this, realizing that even Jesus' silence carried intention, care, and purpose. Nothing in that story happened by chance. And perhaps the same thing is happening in your life now, even if you can't yet see everything clearly. If you've made it this far, comment, "This message was for me." I enjoy reading these comments because they show how many people are going through similar battles, searching for answers, trying to stay strong even amidst the silence. And, in some way, this creates a very strong connection between all of us here. If this video helped you see this passage from Mark 5 in a different light, please give it a like. This shows that this type of content resonates with you and helps the channel continue to bring profound reflections on the gestures, silences, and hidden truths in Jesus' teachings. And if you enjoy this type of message that blends the Bible, historical context, spirituality, and personal transformation, subscribe to the Jesus Beyond Words channel. There's a lot coming up that can further strengthen your faith and change the way you understand various passages that almost no one notices. And there's a video here that really complements this conversation about God's silence and the moments when it seems like heaven is quiet. Click on it and continue watching.